Alrighty. So, without further ado, you want to just give me a little cue? Yeah, right.
All right. Well, my name is Mike Lloret. I'm the wildlife biologist at Turkey Point. My title is senior environmental specialist, but essentially I'm a wildlife biologist on site. It's 11,000 acres. It's a lot of fun for somebody like me, probably somebody like a lot of us that are interested in these kind of topics. A dream come true for, a little animal-loving kid growing up in South Florida like myself. So I'm looking forward to explaining kind of everything that I do in a day-to-day. A lot of my work is seasonal, so just depending on what time of year will determine my workload and exactly the focus of my work. And we'll open it up for questions at the end, and we'll have a good time. So a brief history of the crocodile program, right? That's Turkey Point. For those of you that don't know what Turkey Point is, it's a nuclear power plant down south, right? Like I said, it's 11,000 acres. A lot of it's protected land, right? Land that, yes, in certain areas it's developed, of course, it's protected from residential development, right? So it's not the coast of Florida that's lined with houses, right? So there's a lot of this open land. The crocodile program actually began after the accidental discovery of a crocodile nest. So they're out there doing work, digging around, they hit a nest. They said, hey, these aren't chicken eggs. They brought in a specialist. He looked at it, identified them as crocodile eggs, and basically the rest is history. It's an amazing program, extremely successful. You can imagine we have data for the American crocodile since 1978, so it's pretty amazing. And the number of nests found has increased significantly over time. There's definitely some dips over the years, and there's certain explanations for that. I will specifically be talking to you about my time at Turkey Point, because that's what I've been there for. But of course, feel free to ask any questions along the way. Go ahead if you don't mind.
Sorry.
So here's an aerial shot of Turkey Point. This is the cooling canal system. This is the actual power plant itself. And the way that it works is the discharge, the water comes out at its hottest here, and it acts very much like a car radiator. So the water will come down south all the way. All of it passes through this one canal, flows back up north into the intake. So this is 168 linear miles of cooling canals. It's a lot of habitat. Within those cooling canals are these berms, these strips of land that you'll see pictures of now. Contrary to popular belief, the crocodiles are not just there for the warm water. I hear this all the time, right? I give talks kind of all over. There's this common belief that the crocs are only there for the warm water. And it's not true. I will say in the winter, they probably enjoy the warm water, right? It probably serves a purpose for them, but that is not the reason that they're there. The canals provide food and shelter. More than anything, these berms are artificial, right? We made them. They're elevated. When you're talking about crocs in a never-changing world, a lot of their natural areas that they nest in flood, okay? That's going to be one of the biggest issues for crocodiles going forward. So we have these artificial berms, these strips of land that happen to be fantastic substrate for these crocs. Basically, the females are attracted to nest in the berm. Of course, the males come chasing the females, and anybody that's born there has the ability to stay or go as they please. It's high security for people, but crocs can come and go as they want.
Are they a PVC line, like liners? I mean, how do you keep from all the water seeping into the aquifer?
There's no liners.
It's just straight.
It's constant. There is groundwater contact, and it's just a giant experiment. There's constantly new things that have come up. They're always dredging, removing sediment, putting it back up on the berms. There's a lot going on. It's really, really interesting. It's been a real treat to be a part of it, because I actually joined when things were going downhill. And this week, actually, we had 3-foot visibility where you can see the bottom of the water, which is like amazing, amazing.
Is it salt or fresh water?
It's salt water. So historically, this was connected to the bay, right? You can see right here is where it historically connected, and right here. I believe it was in the 70s that was cut off, and it's been a closed loop system ever since. Obviously, ideal location in between Biscayne National Park and Everglades National Park. That's kind of how a lot of the animals kind of started coming in. And then over time, FPL has done a fantastic job to create habitat for a lot of these animals. So here's a good shot, good aerial shot of some of the berms. So just strips of land. Each section is about a mile long. And so literally during the nesting season or pre-nesting season, I will go up and down every single one of these canals looking for any crocodile drags or any activity to track the mother crocs and where they're nesting.
What's the width there of the canals and the land?
It depends on how much they've eroded over time. Some of the berms are extremely vegetated. Some of them are completely bare.
Like 10 feet, 20 feet?
No, more than that. You're talking about, I would say 50 feet minimum.
Yeah,
Wow.
and that's the berm, not the canal.
No, that's the canal.
Okay, the canal.
The berms are more slender.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So some of the crocodile program responsibilities, I kind of hit on it earlier. Just depending on what time of year it is will determine what work will be on my plate. But I have perimeter truck surveys where I'll drive around the whole perimeter, count crocs, estimate size, night surveys, nest surveys, hatching surveys, and quarterly croc captures. And quarterly croc captures when we go out at night and try to catch any size crocodile, it's not just the hatchlings. Excuse me. Crocodile safety, so it's my job to inform everybody in the plant, right? And the line I like to use is, you don't have to love them, but you damn sure have to respect them, right? You know, I don't expect everybody to be obsessed with them, but if you're gonna work there, you better respect them because every single person that's driving a car puts that animal at risk, that species at risk. So everybody gets a brief. It's actually federally mandated that I give a presentation every 6 months to all the employees of the plant. So everybody is informed, and if they tell you otherwise, they're lying.
The captures are for tagging purposes only?
Yes, yeah, just monitoring of the population. So crocodile program presentations, I do it at the plant, I do, outreach work as well. And then putting up signs. So I have crocodile crossing signs all throughout the plant, all outside the plant, crocodile nesting signs, crocodile sanctuary signs. I want to leave no excuse, right? If you can read, you have no excuse. Maintenance of crocodile habitat and sanctuaries. I'm going briefly in all these talking points because the next slide I'll go into more in depth. That's probably the most exciting, at least for me. I come from a background of a lot of captive animals, right? That's always been a big part of my life. And the best way I can explain it is, if I owned the cooling canals, I am doing exactly what I would be doing to produce as many crocodiles as possible with the space that I have, right? And I'll show you pictures and explain all that. And then outreach programs and collaborations, such as this one today. So there's an example of some signs. So you have a croc nesting area, crocodile crossing sign. There I'm installing a crocodile sanctuary sign. Forgive my photography skills. I know most biologists are pretty good with a camera. I am not. But I like to just take the picture to prove it happened, but I'm not too good past that. Next slide, please. So habitat creation. This is probably my favorite part about it. We have a lot of toys to play with, given we're a nuclear site, right? There's everything right there on site. It is truly incredible. If you think about what a group of biologists would have to go through in, let's say, a national park to get permission to modify land, even if it's for the betterment of a species, right? You'd be going through applications and approvals for moving a grain of sand, right? And some of those are great, some of those are a little extreme. I don't have to do that. So it's as easy as basically saying, hey, Mike knows what he's talking about. We're going to go modify this habitat because it's going to be good for crocs. We organize it, we get the guys that we need, the operators, and we get it done. So that's Kenny. Kenny is my right hand out there. He is a foreman on site, can operate any machine, and that's actually the backhoe dragging through the canal system. So we operate on airboats for the most part. It's a rain-based system for the most part, which means depending on how much water will determine, how deep it is. So there's some areas that are only a couple inches and you need an airboat to get through it. Those are also some areas that are 20 feet that you wouldn't be able to do this. So we crawl this thing over there, we get it up on the berms. This is what it looked like before we dug the pond. So complete transformation, right? And what I do is I'll go every single year and I'll try to think of 1 to 3 big projects, right? And this would classify as a big project to improve crocodile habitat, right? So a pond is really important. I'll get into that later, but really important for crocs at Turkey Point. It's just a closer picture of it. That becomes a crocodile sanctuary, and basically the purpose of those signs is to say a crocodile sanctuary is an area where a croc either has ideal nesting substrate, ideal nursery habitat, both, all the above, whatever you want to look at it. I put up these signs as a reminder for anybody operating in the system that they cannot go in that area. And if they do need to go in that area, they need to speak to me before going in there. That way we can brief, we can make sure there's not going to be any issues, any conflicts. However, I will say, crocodiles aren't the best breeders, right? Just because we make this beautiful habitat doesn't mean they won't nest outside the habitat, right? So that comes with, other challenges. But we've done a pretty good job with kind of funneling them where we want them to go. So
You don't have any restrictions on vegetation removal or anything inside?
no, it is technically a wastewater site, but it's much more than that for us, right? Things could definitely be way worse given what is allowed,
Right.
but FPL has taken the opportunity to make it great habitat. So it's a testament to them for sure. Here's just a picture of a crocodile sanctuary and a crocodile hanging out on it with my iPhone, so it's blurry and terrible. Another big part of my job, mitigating human and animal conflict. I hinted at it before, right? We are a nuclear site. Work has to get done, right? The work has to get done within reason, within the law, within protecting wildlife. So they'll send little me into these big, giant meetings, and I can say no. I can say, no, you cannot do that. We'll have to discuss it, decide, how we move forward, how do they get their job done without impacting the crocs, how do we compromise, right? So again, something that they don't really have to do, but they choose to do, and I'm grateful for it because I have a job, but it's pretty amazing. So just a couple examples here. That's actually an eastern diamondback rattlesnake. So our largest venomous snake species in South Florida. It's the most common snake species we have on site, actually. So I do a lot of talking about them because they are all over the place. We don't want people running them over. We don't want people getting bit. This is kind of a cool story. So you can kind of see all this dust on this rattlesnake, and that tells me that he was hanging out in a construction area for a little while, right? He got coated in that dirt, right? You guys know when you drive through a construction site, that dust goes all over the place. So I found him weeks into a job, and I always use this picture to kind of explain to people. The animals are there. I'm not going to remove every animal so that you can operate. You are responsible for yourselves. I'm just here to let you know that they're here, right? And of course, if one comes slithering in the middle of the job site, I'll come out, I'll relocate it, everybody will be safe. But that doesn't mean that his brother, his sister, his cousin, all that aren't hanging around right next to him, right? Here's another example. This was a big job where they put all these silt screens out, right? And it happened to impede this crocodile's natural pattern of where it was moving. So it kept popping up in this area, right? So we were actually able to modify the job to not disturb it as much, right? And obviously, those screens are completely safe. They don't have ropes hanging off of them. They don't have anything that the crocodile can get tangled up in. All that is really important because wildlife doesn't necessarily follow the rules all the time. So next slide, please. So this one's really fun. That's a picture that I got sent in the middle of the night. About a 10, 11 foot crocodiles in the intake of the power plant.
That's a good place to be.
So I am on call 24/7 for any wildlife emergencies. This is the most fun I get to have, but it's also very challenging, right? So what they do is they open up this grate, right? Here's the croc. That is the same croc as this. And if you can imagine, from where we're standing here, it's about 20 feet down where the water is, right? So I get attached to a crane for safety purposes. They lift this grate. So now this is giant, wide open. I noose the croc 20 feet down. There's pumps running simultaneously, right? Makes things very difficult. And it becomes a race against time. You don't want that croc to drown. Once you have that croc on the noose, you need to get it out as soon as possible. Only problem is the croc weighs 450 pounds. You're not just going to dead weight lift it 20 feet from one noose around his neck, right? You have to get pretty creative. So what do? We actually dropped the stretcher down. We were able to pull the croc onto it and then lift it with a crane.
Wow.
Doesn't always happen like that. If you can imagine, if you can picture this, I know it's kind of difficult. You're working with a well that's probably this wide. I have the croc on a noose. The pumps are running. The croc isn't just laying there. The croc is moving with the pumps like this. He's on a noose. Pull the croc to one side, drop the stretcher, start to pull the croc this way. If you can imagine, this stretcher you can see here has cables going this way. So if I want to pull the croc through, I mean, I'm strong, but I'm not that strong, right? So I assemble a team, right, of guys to help me try to get that croc on. You're fighting the pump, you're fighting the dead weight, you're fighting the croc if it's moving. Once you get it on there, it's like, oh, thank God. And you lift it up, you wrap the mouth, you take it, and you relocate it, right?
Are they the same thing as alligators? It's closing them out where the force is not open?
Correct.
How did they even find him in there? And if there was a grate on top of him, how did somebody even notice?
They do regular checks.
Uh,
Yeah, where it's really important. We actually have a croc now that I've removed out of there 3 times.
Same one.
Just really likes the jacuzzi.
Same one.
Likes the jacuzzi effect.
Well, what happens is, just outside the grates, there's dead fish collect, right? It's the intake, so everything gets sucked in there. So that's his territory. And when I relocate him, like I said, whether it's a day, whether it's
Goes
3
right
months, he makes his way back, right? He knows where the food is, he knows where the fish is, he goes right back in. Not only that, the birds come to eat the fish, and he's there to eat the birds, so he's got it all figured out.
You haven't tried to put a protective grate or anything on the intake?
That would make too much sense, my friend. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. You're dealing with a multi-million-dollar, whatever it is, industry that those pumps need to keep running, and it's my job to make sure a croc doesn't get caught up in it.
Right, so it can't stop the machine.
Correct.
No, then you lose power to like half of Miami.
Exactly, and that's a big problem. So the annual cycle, the American Croc and Turkey Point, we have pre-mating January to February. It's really, really amazing to see. Here you have this elusive, massive predator that so many people haven't even been lucky to see, right? Displaying all these amazing behaviors, whether it's courtship, whether it's battle, fighting, for mates, for territory. You see it all in the canals. And so that's why we gain a lot of popularity from the big networks, and Nat Geo and Discovery. Everybody wants to film crocs there, right? So it's a pretty cool situation. Mating is from, mid-February to mid-April. Nesting, April to May. Incubation is April to August, right? We're coming up into hatching season, which is June to August, which typically by the end of June, we have our first nest popping. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's some pictures. Here's 2, I would say 12, 13-foot males, just absolutely trying to kill each other, obviously. So I was driving along the canal, and I saw 2 big males hanging out next to each other. And this was earlier on. This wasn't in the recent past. And I said, well, that's kind of weird. I'm kind of scratching my head. That's too big to be a female for the most part. So something's going on. But when I saw them, they were calm. Well, I said, let me park my truck, let me watch it for a little bit. And they just started going at it. What they would do is they'd go as much as their energy would allow it, and then they'd rest. And then they'd go at it, and then they'd rest. And then they'd go at I ran my iPhone battery to 0. I have tons of videos. I probably still, to this day, have not watched them all, but I have them. And that's just kind of one of the pictures I took. And what actually ended up happening, the end of the battle was the victor grabbed the entire skull of the other croc, and you just hear a crunch. And to my knowledge, that croc didn't die, but he said, all right, I've had enough, and he swam off.
Oh my God.
So if you can kind of put yourself in my shoes and imagine those two big males next to each other, this is what's kind of more common, right? You see a big male with a smaller female. When I see that, I say, okay, that's not a cause for concern. That's normal courtship behavior, right? And it's a male and a female, so they're probably not going to fight, but they might show up for courtship displays, right? Sometimes you'll see them swim off together. You'll see them open their mouths and kind of, they do all these dances, you know, various dancers. And then just a picture of a pair there, big male, big female, big healthy pair there on the canal bank. That's what we want to see. I could watch that all day long. Yes, ma'am.
How do you tell the difference between the male and the female? Are the
So-
females just smaller?
Yeah, if you could go back for a second.
Sure.
Sorry.
No.
Right here, this is perfect. To me, it's very obvious. But again, kind of the same way I explained them. If I were to just block this out, you might think this is a male because it's a rather big female. But if you were to compare animals of similar size, the male's heads are blockier, bulkier. You can see his head is a lot thicker, which is why they get confused for alligators all the time. Her snout, you can imagine, is a little bit more petite, right? A little smaller, more slender, and they just don't get those big, you know, masculine bulldog features. The females are a little bit more slender, a little bit more elongated, and I can usually tell, even if it's not a full-blown adult male, I can usually tell based on where it's hanging out, because a younger male wouldn't be nowhere near this guy if he valued his life. So nesting and incubation, they are primarily cavity nesters, which means they're more or less like sea turtles. They'll open up a hole, lay their eggs, cover the hole, and then they'll wait about 90 days for incubation. So this is kind of a standard nest site, right? So what really happens is, you can imagine the water here, she comes up, she'll scratch and sniff, find a place to lay there, cover back up, and then she kind of does a U and goes back out. That's a nest I dug up just to confirm it was there, and then just a closer shot there. I have had them mound nest, which is what alligators do, but I've only seen that twice. Then hatching, right? Most exciting time of year, like I said, it's right around the corner, busiest time of year for me. Super cool stuff. That's a picture that a way better photographer took of the crocodiles that we showed them. This is a picture from one of my trail cameras earlier on when I started this program. This was like, I can't believe I got this picture, minus this blade of grass that ruined it. But this tells the whole story. We dug that pond. That pond filled in with native vegetation. We removed the vegetation here to allow that female to have a place to nest. And there's mom during the day, which is pretty rare, collecting her baby right there from her nest, and there's an egg hanging out of her mouth there. What she was doing was coming up from the pond, retrieving her hatchlings, and taking them back to that pond.
Aw.
So this is actually a video if it'll play.
Let's see.
There we go. Do we have sound? Or no sound. If we don't have sound, the baby's fun.
Oh.
No. So here's this,
Protecting it.
you know, bloodthirsty beast, as some people like to call them, right? Being so gentle. What they'll actually do is they'll pick up the eggs that haven't hatched, and there we go. I can hear this, it's not very loud.
It's off my computer, so it's a little muted. Sounds like a mouse, like a squeaky little mouse.
Yes. And she'll actually just put gentle pressure from the top and bottom jaw and assist those hatchlings in emerging from their eggs.
Aw.
Maybe they'll shoot out, right? So she knows this. She knows that a lot of them need help if something were to happen to the mother during incubation of the nest, the babies probably would never make it because they really don't dig out themselves. They need mom to come dig them out. Now, if it's opened up and exposed and it's not too hot, the babies might be able to find their way to the water. But little fun fact, probably the biggest predator for crocs is fire ants. You can imagine that. They can skeletonize a baby croc in less than 24 hours. No problem.
Wow.
So what's kind of cool is I try to be on top of every nest as much as I possibly can. It's a lot of ground to cover. I can't get to them all, but I try my best to beat the heat and to beat the fire ants. So it's a lethal combination of once the mother exposes the nest, you wait till midday, the babies are cooked, the rest of the eggs are cooked, and the ants are gonna finish the job. So,
What's your average number of nests per season?
I'm sorry, who was asking that? I couldn't tell. Okay, average number of nests, we've had the two historic best seasons in the last 2 years of 28 and 33. Just the most concentrated American crocodile breeding ground in all of South Florida.
So just another question real quick. So since this is such an amazing system, what percentage, just to guess, what percentage of crocs in South Florida do you think come from here?
I don't have a number for you,
Right.
but there's a lot of information in the database that would be interesting to look at. You'd have to have year cutoffs where it's something that could probably slightly be answered with a little bit of accuracy, just based on the crops that have been tagged in the past, but it's not something that I know off the top of my head. So, kind of a cool story with that though is there was a croc that was born and tagged at Turkey Point that popped up in a golf course in Tampa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, as an adult.
Long trip.
It's a long trip, and Tampa is too cold for the most part for them to sustain life. So that croc would either have to come south naturally or perish, basically. So, yes.
Do you tag them all?
Yes.
That's right. How many have you tagged since you've been there?
Thousands.
Wow.
I don't know off the top of my head, but
But
thousands.
they're just normal tags. They're not like radio telemetry tags or anything like that.
It's a pin tag just like you put in your
Right.
dog or your cat, and
Right,
a scoop clip. We put unique clips into their tails, which I'll get into a little bit and explain it to you. Yes, sir.
What is the approximate size of the population in Turkey?
So it's a calculated number. It's not my favorite answer to kind of tell people, but I will tell it to you. It's 400 non-hatchling animals utilized as a site. The reason hatchlings aren't included is because when crocs hatch, they're on the bottom of the food chain, right? Very few make it to adulthood. Everything's against them. Just like I always compare them to sea turtles because people are more familiar with sea turtles. But here's this tiny little crocodile that hatches out. It's on the food chain for everything. Like I said, it starts with fire ants. It goes to crabs, fish, turtles, birds, other crocodilians, right? So all odds are stacked against them when they hatch. Until they get, 5-6 feet, eliminate most of the predators, they're not safe, right? So here I am. You can see I'm a kid in a candy store. This is me every year at the end of June, all the way to August. It's actually going out there, retrieving the hatchling crocs. I'm lucky enough where sometimes I actually get to hatch them in my hands. This situation arises based off the situation I explained earlier, where some babies will be left in the nest in the heat of the day, right? And our permit allows us to intervene, right? Just give those crocs a chance. Otherwise, they'd be, cooked in the sun and hand food, right? So we'll go out, we'll try to catch as many as we can, and we take them back to the lab to do the processing. Next picture, please. So now we'll go through the processing situation, right? We collect biometric data, all different types of measurements, weights, right? We sex them. We do our best to sex them. It's not easy to sex them. We insert a microchip, just like a dog or a cat, right? So that's that ID, that number, right? That's the only croc in the world with that number, right? So how this program works is when we catch that croc again, whether it be in a golf course in Tampa, whether it be at Turkey Point, whether it be at Black Point Marina, whether it be at Pelican Harbor, the information for the last time that croc was captured is in a database, right? FWC, us, any other agency that is working with crocodiles, we all work closely together, we speak to each other, we share information to better help the crocs. We cut unique scoop clip numbers in their tails, right? So you can imagine a crocodile's tail that has 3 rows of scales, of scoops. From the base of the cloaca, right, more towards the head, I guess, it's 2 rows that feed into one, right? So each one of those rows gets a clip depending on the number that's associated with that animal. For people like me, it's a system I understand in my head, obviously, because I tag a lot of crocs. So if I'm out at Black Point Marina or here or whatever, I can see the croc's tail. I can at least tell you where that croc was first tagged. I can't tell you, I don't have a database memorized, I don't know everything about the crocs off the top of my head, but I at least know where that croc was first caught or potentially hatched at, just by looking at one particular row of scoops. I can also tell you which agency tagged it, because each agency has their own tags. There's University of Florida, there's Turkey Point, there's FWC.
But you're actually able, are you just clipping off scoot scales, or are you adding an actual clip?
No, clipping it off.
You're just clipping it
So
off, right?
It's like
Right, as a baby,
it's like clipping
an excision.
I wouldn't go that far. It's less than that. I mean, it's like a fingernail.
Yeah.
At its worst, it's a drop of blood. They barely feel it. So, yes, sir.
Did you say that the gator nests and the croc nests are different?
On average, yes. So gator nests are more mound nesters. They'll build up vegetation, whereas crocs will dig a hole and bury their eggs. Yes.
How many eggs do they usually have?
You can have anywhere from 20 to 50 eggs, depending on the size and age of those eggs.
Do they look a lot like gator eggs?
The eggs, yeah, very similar. And then, of course, releasing the babies back into wild, which is the best part. This is the quarterly captures, which I mentioned earlier. Just kind of put me on the boat there with us. Here we are in a porta boat, actually not in the cooling canals, but in perimeter canals. We have a biologist there writing down the data. This is a captured croc. It's already taped up. It's noosed. Here's a bigger croc, also in a porta boat. This is a lot of fun when the croc doesn't fit in the boat, right? You have to process it on the side of the boat. So that was like I think it was like a 10-foot animal. And then here, I'm putting in a pit tag on that croc. So it's a lot of teamwork, a lot of late nights, a lot of mosquito bites. Everybody's usually gung-ho to be a part of it until they go out and
Actually do
and
it.
make their donation, right? Make their donation to the mosquitoes of South Florida. A lot of outreach programs and collaborations, right? Just like I said, what we're doing here. So that was an event at Marlins Park for FPL. That's a talk that I had a Burmese python. I was explaining, invasive species situations. Then the rules changed. You couldn't have Burmese pythons, so I had to use the skin. But now the rules are back, so we can use them again. Cool. Next slide, please. The media. So as I mentioned earlier, it's really popular, right? And once you see how it kind of works, basically one network will film, every network catches wind of that, and everybody wants a piece, right? So then everybody tries to film the same thing. It's kind of funny how it works when you're on the other side of it. I never really saw that, without being on the production side, but now I see how it works. So you get to work with all these people. Jeff Corwin is somebody that I grew up watching on TV. Peter Gross, who is now doing Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. That's Carrie over there with ABC or NBC. And that's Jeff Corwin there. We're releasing good crocs back into the wild. Next slide, please. Publications, right? So gotta get down to the science. We try to do as much as we can to contribute, right, to the science behind American crocs. That's a whole other world, a lot more work added on to what you're already doing, right? So this is kind of a more fun thing on the side that I try to do whenever I can, right? On the left there, this is just a scientific note published to prove that raccoons are a diet item for crocs, right? And then over here, this was a really fun one for me. This was a dead manatee carcass that washed up, and I put a camera on it, and I have hundreds of pictures of the crocs picking apart the carcass. Right?
But that's not normally a prey item for them. That's just opportunistic carcass.
That's what crocs do, though.
Yeah.
They're always looking for an opportunity.
Nice.
So here you can actually, there's a croc, there's a croc, there's a croc. In broad daylight, there was up to 6 crocs feeding on this carcass.
Wow.
And they all got so engorged and full that they would just hang out next to the carcass, like, just waiting to digest so they can have some more.
Okay.
Yes.
You had mentioned the Burmese python before. Is that a predator for the eggs or for the hatchlings or?
Not for the eggs, unlikely the hatchlings as well. But they do eat alligators, that's been proven. It's never been proven that they eat crocs, but they would. It's just a matter of them crossing
Have you
paths.
seen a lot out there at Turkey Point?
No, not too many. They're there, they breed there. But like for instance, this year we've only got 2 so far this year.
Mm.
But you
And-
kill them when you see it.
Correct, yeah.
Do crocodiles eat them?
They would. That one has been proven before. Yeah, somebody has seen a croc eating a python. But all of these interactions, you just have to be lucky enough to see them.
Yeah.
Like myself, knowing crocodiles and knowing pythons, I can confidently say that I'm sure it happens. But I feel like it would be irresponsible of me to tell you it happens because nobody's proven it yet, right? Somebody has to see it, film it, document it. But pretty much, it's only a matter of time before somebody does.
Since it's a closed system, how do manatees get in there? How
Oh,
do-
that was in a perimeter canal. That wasn't in the cooling canal system. That was in one of the canals coming off the bay. Funny story about that though. That would be a real big problem if the manatee just showed up in our system, right? Well,
Oh, no.
well, I got a picture. No, there was the remains of a manatee carcass that were on the edge of the cooling canals. And if I didn't find it there and I just found the carcass in the canals, I would really have to do some thinking. But what happened was the crocs dragged it from outside the system into the system. And they happened to either something came up or they got spooked off the carcass and they left it right there on the bank. So there's slides of them trying to drag the carcass back into the cooling canals. So I'm glad I found it where I did, because otherwise they'd be like, oh my God, there's manatees in the cooling canal, which is not possible.
That would exactly be good,
Yes.
not for the manatees.
No.
What are some of the
Yeah.
other native species they utilize in the Burmese?
All sorts of stuff. All different types of snake species, the birds, there's tons of wading birds.
What kind of birds get there?
I mean, roseate spoon, every wading bird that you can think of. Roseate spoonbills, tricolor herons, reddish
Do
egrets.
they nest?
No, we don't have,
Trees.
the only high trees we have, any secondary habitat that we have is Australian pines, and they're all being removed.
What about shorebirds and seabirds?
Tons of shorebirds.
But they could nest there. You could have.
They do, so we have one of the largest nesting populations of least terns.
Ooh.
Yeah, so we have about
Really?
5 berms that they're more rocky, which is obviously what they like.
Do you have active least terns nesting there now?
Yeah, we just did a survey 2 weeks ago.
That's so.
Yeah, you see, I have some pictures of it, it's on this
That's what
presentation.
I do.
What's that?
That's what I do.
Oh, really?
In travel.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, we have one of the largest populations of nesting
Oh, I gotta talk to you.
least. So camera traps. I was able to get cellular trail cameras, right, which is a huge tool for me. My phone goes off like crazy, but I can deal with it. Basically, I can check on the crocs when I'm not home, right, watching TV, which never happens because I'm always with the crocs. But it's a tool that I use to know when those nests are hatching. Obviously, I don't have 30 plus cameras out there. Try to get as many as I can out there, usually 8 to 10. And it's just another kind of, trick that I have to stay ahead of what's going on, right? So my wife gets mad at it sometimes, but before I go to bed every night, I'll try to scan through any of my alerts, right? And my phone's on loud 24/7, like I said. So if I have a mother croc that's frequenting that camera, frequenting that nesting area, it's gonna be going ding, 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 ding. I might wake up, I might not. And I'll know, okay, the next day we have to go, assuming she's retrieving her offspring, we'll have to assemble the croc team and go select babies. So here's 2 different nests. two different mothers. Here's Mama Croc with the tail hanging out of her mouth. And here's Mama Croc with the already exposed nest, and you can see her just picking up those babies with their mouth. Here's another video.
Whoa.
So,
She does that for all the eggs, or?
No, a lot of them will hatch by themselves within the nest. But basically, she's coming up and checking and trying to hear if they're ready to hatch, right? Mama always knows best, right? She's got the instinct to come to tell her. So as they get closer to hatching, the mothers will come more frequently to the nest, right? And then the babies, when they pip, pipping is when they break the egg for the first time, and they're vocalizing, they're calling mom from underground. I've actually been standing over nests where I can hear the hatchlings, and mom hasn't come to get them yet. It's fascinating. In this particular situation, we had already actually retrieved the babies. And so she was just making sure nobody was left behind. Yes.
I was under the impression that sex determination in these crocs is temperature based.
Yes.
So do you have an issue with the warm water causing more males?
The warm water doesn't affect the incubation per se, the incubation substrate. And we only have warmer water in 3 sections that is probably, I would say off the top of my head, maybe a fourth of the system, which is where they really don't prefer to nest anyways. We do get a couple nests there, but it's not where they mainly nest. So that's not too much of a concern. But like I mentioned earlier, sexing, hatching crocodiles, we're not very accurate with it, because what happens is the organs of a male and a female at that size are so similar looking, whereas like after a year, you can obviously tell a male from a female very easily, but since they're so small and their organs are so small, they're very similar looking. So we document all this, but the only way we're testing it is if we catch that croc later on. We can go back and say, hey, you know, this guy knows what he's doing, or this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Yes, ma'am.
Are you tracking mom so that you're not like coming when she's there, or?
She's, as a general rule, what I always kind of teach my guys is she's there. Treat it like she's there. Some will defend, most will not. So American croc, you're talking about a species that's very shy by nature. On top of that, at Turkey Point, most of them have been caught before. They hate people, right? And that's the best way to have it. The biggest problems we have are when the crocs lose the fear of people. You know, at marinas, cleaning stations, people start feeding them. They lose that natural fear of people. They get too close, and there's an accident, right? So it's that healthy respect. There is one mother that I always can't wait to see her every year, and I'm sure she can't wait to see me, but she defends her nest adamantly. We try to work around that any way we can. So really cool. Here's all the nest and all the hatchling information for the entire program at Turkey Point, right? So you're talking about in the 70s, 1 to 2 nests, 20, 30, 18, 34 hatchlings, 0, right? And over time, there's this trend, right? I want to talk about this trend right here, because that's when I've been a part of the program. So in 2015, it was a drought year. The system crashed. All the seagrass died. I'm sure you guys heard about it. It was terrible for the system, right? Huge shock. What we've been doing in the Environmental Research Center is basically trying to rebound from that up until this point. And I am telling you right now, as I'm standing here, that this whole last 2 weeks was clear water, which is, I'm used to seeing green water, right? With you know, so much turbidity that you can't see because of all the algae blooms, right? Now you're talking about water, which we don't expect it to stay that way right now. We're still working out the kinks, but you're balancing all these environmental factors: heat, salinity, water, seagrass, algae growth, nutrients. Nutrients is a huge problem, right? So we have people, there's actually 7 or 8 people that are dedicated just to the water quality, right? And they know a lot more than I do. So yeah, so over time, so from here on, you can see there's this big trend going upwards. And in 2021, we had our most hatchlings of all time with 565. And in 2022, we had our most nests of all time with 33. So I'm hoping, I'm a very competitive person. I try to beat the last number every year. 2020, I had COVID, so it doesn't really matter. So yeah, things are looking great for the crocs. Other wildlife at Turkey Point, approximately 11,000 acres, highly protected land, prime location between Biscayne and Everglades National Park. FPL has a mitigation bank, so all south and west of Turkey Point, FPL gets mitigation credits, right? Removing invasive species, restoring native habitat. Something that most people don't know, but amazing stuff. Again, it's like you get to go out there, amazing habitat. We actually did a manatee rescue in one of our mitigation areas, and we had the whole FWC manatee rescue team. We had volunteers from the Department of Fisheries, and they're like, "This is the most pristine mangrove habitat I've ever seen." All it is because the public doesn't have access to it. It's that simple. There's buoys where boats can't get in, people can't fish. There's fish everywhere. They're everywhere because nobody bought them. So we have fresh, brackish, and saltwater that are easily accessible for crocs. That's important. So some birds. So you got the killdeer nesting there, little least-turned chick, and a lot of these shorebirds, that's their nest. It's not much of a nest. They usually kind of just lay them right there on the rocks. And what we do with FWC every year for the least turns is they'll come out, we'll walk the berms, we do nest counts, hatching counts, all that fun stuff, and they handle that data. Just some examples of some birds there. You got the little blue, the roseate spoonbill, the green herons, all different types of wading birds. You had asked who's nesting there. The green herons nest there. The other two, I've never seen a nest. Like I said, we don't have a lot of those bigger tree islands and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was thinking more of seabirds and shorebirds. Do you ever have any skimmers nesting there?
No. Skimmers I see occasionally, not commonly. I saw one within the last 3 weeks, and it was hanging out with an American avocet. Kind of interesting. I don't know if there's a rhyme or reason. I have pictures of them right next to each other.
Love to see that.
When one flew off, the other one with it. Weird. I don't know. Snakes, as I mentioned before, the eastern diamondback's the most common snake species. So I get a lot of calls for those, getting them out of trouble, getting people out of potential harm's way. Rat snakes, a lot of red-faced saltmarsh snakes. Snake people, I love to hear that. Saltmarsh snakes come in a wide variety of colors, different color phases, from black to gray to dark red to orangey to this red. I would say this is the most common colorway. I've seen them from little freshly born babies to full-grown adults like that. And then the king of all snakes in Florida, or arguably the United States, the eastern diamondback, the eastern indigo snake. The species is very near and dear to my heart. For people that don't like snakes, I try to tell people to love them because they eat the venomous snakes, right? So they'll eat the rattlesnakes. And luckily at Turkey Point, we have a strong population. I'm working on getting our permits so that we can help, monitor them as well. Another federally protected species that's suffering greatly from habitat fragmentation. Our population has a lot to give because it's not your typical population. They like to live where gopher tortoises are and use their burrows, things like that. We don't have any gopher tortoises, but what we do have is when we remove Australian pines, we pile them up, and we think that they live in there. So it creates this labyrinth, and we try to make a good situation out of a bad one. So pretty cool. Next slide, please. I like to show this set of slides, especially to my workers out there. You know, anybody that's going to be walking through tall grass or something like that. My lawn guys and stuff like that. So this is where I didn't follow my own advice. You can see my feet here. I was rushing in buggy season, right? We have some of the worst deer flies you can ever imagine, right? I'm carrying 2 traps in my hand, and I'm walking fast because the flies are biting me, and I don't have hands to swat them. And I walk literally so perfectly on this eastern diamondback that I probably would have been fine because I probably would have stepped perfectly on his head and been okay. But I happened to see it just out of the corner of my eye as my foot was going down, right? I broke every single one of my rules, but I used this as an example. So I was able to actually kind of tumble forward, avoid the snake. The snake didn't even flinch, right? Because he's just hanging out being a snake. But I came back and I took the picture so that you can see how great their camouflage is. So the snake's right here, if you haven't found it yet. This is a little bit more zoomed in. It's coiled up, and this is all the way zoomed in there. So never moved. Here's a 228-pound potential predator, basically over him, right? Nothing. Didn't even flinch. I would say on average, the eastern diamondbacks barely even bite. I know that's hard for some people to believe, but I've removed tons of them, relocated tons of them, and very rarely do I get them actually defensively biting. All they want to do is get away. Yes.
What were the rules that you broke?
Look where you're going.
Look where I'm going.
Don't step on
Don't be
diamondbacks.
carrying too many things. Don't not pay attention to where you're standing, especially if you're walking in prime eastern diamondback rattlesnake habitat. Don't get distracted. Everything. Broke them all. Yeah. So here's some terrible trail camera pictures just of some mammal action: bobcat, raccoon, and coyote.
They eat the eggs.
Raccoons, yes. Actually, I'm very mad at those raccoons this year because for the first time since I've been there, they cleaned out an entire nest. 30 plus eggs that I could find. So who knows how many more they took off.
Little bastards.
Ate them completely. So,
I was
yes.
gonna say, that's great to see some mammals, because I know down in the Everglades, they're saying the snakes have eaten all the raccoons.
Yeah, that's a study that's based off of one road. There's plenty of raccoons. There's plenty of other animals. That piece of information gets regurgitated everywhere, but it's from one study on one road. And the problem with a lot of the studies in the Everglades is they're done on levees because a lot of the Everglades, it's very tough terrain to manage, right? So you're talking about disturbed areas that they're studying. So pythons are a problem, but invasive species have become extremely political. So depending on what the news wants to put out there, will completely push the public one way or another.
I was just thinking from camping down there, you used to see raccoons all the time getting into the trash bins and stuff like that, and you don't see anything.
It could be. Where exactly are you talking about? Flamingo?
On Monkey
Monkey.
down
I
there.
still see them a ton when I'm down there. Off Loop Road, they're everywhere.
Yeah, we're like
They
at
got a
Turkey
bag of
Point.
Cheetos long enough.
At Turkey Point, we have too many raccoons. They're everywhere, and the raccoons are actually huge problems for native prey too because they eat all the eggs, right? So they'll go on canal banks and find all the turtle eggs and eat all the turtle eggs. I love raccoons. I just don't love when they eat the crocodiles. So it's just some invasive species stuff here. I had a real tough time finding a better picture than that of a bigger snake, but that was actually not a Turkey Point. Just my buddies and I were looking for pythons, and we got that 16-footer. This is about the size of what they hatch at, right? So that's the palm of my hand. So that's hatching that's coiled up in my hand. That's a tegu, Argentine black and white tegu in the bottom left, which I would say is way worse and way more of a threat to the South Florida ecosystem than the python, but you'll never hear about those because they're not.
Well, they're not as many.
Oh, there's plenty. There's plenty. And they're egg eaters, right? So again, you're talking about the python that they don't eat as frequently, right? A tegu is eating a lot more frequently. It's attacking our native species before they even hatch by going for their eggs. If you're talking about shorebirds, the tegu gets to a shorebird area, they're just gonna walk down and just gobble everything up as they go.
Have you seen a tegu in your area?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're at 64 this year. Which I'm not gonna get into, but some new rules came into play in 2021. And since those new rules, prior to those rules, we had 12 tegus caught, the entire year. Now, so let's back up. Before the rules changed, 2021 we had 12. 2022 we had 26. This year we're only halfway through the trapping season. We're already at 64. 66. I'm sorry, I did this morning. They got put on the prohibited species list, which means that you can't have them as pets and you cannot sell them. We had a free service by people that were capable of catching them. They'd catch them and they'd sell them, right? They'd mostly sell them out of state. Those people are all out of business, right? If you think about it, somebody that works for the state, right? They probably have a salary, right? Something that they're going out checking trap, because the way you catch tegus is through traps, right? So you run a trap line, whereas a private trapper, they're getting paid per tegu that they sell. So they're much more motivated to catch more animals, right? So it's troubling because we get back to public perception, right? People that are very anti-invasive species, right? You don't want new ones coming in, right? So to the average person, yeah, let's make them prohibited. You can't have them as pets. But when you're talking about the tegu and the python, they've been here for years already. There's no point in making them prohibited. Tegu, python, and iguana, right? There's so many iguanas, and they've gotten so much worse in 2021. So that's
Well, if it's illegal to own or sell them, people are probably dumping them outside anyway because they can't do anything with them.
Yeah, but that's such a small percentage of it. They're able to breed and they're not being kept in numbers at all.
What eggs are those?
Iguana. So all the invasive species, iguanas we don't anymore. The only reason we cut up an iguana is to count eggs now. But we don't really have, actually now we do. We are doing it, but they're what we call low priority. Iguanas have been here since the 70s. Any of us that have grown up here, grown up with iguanas, but they are a nuisance. They do need to be, managed. But they really like disturbed land. They're not in the Everglades, causing havoc, right? Whereas the tegu is slowly encroaching on the Everglades, is capable of living in that habitat. The python's the same thing, right? So when they put these blanket bans, they don't make much sense. Every animal needs to be classified based off its abilities or its preferences for becoming established in South Florida, the habitat it prefers, right? So I don't know if we want to watch this. I don't know how much time we have. This was a feature that we did with Mutual of Omaha. I'm sure some of you guys are, no Mutual of Omaha. It's making a comeback with the new host, Peter Gross. And although I'm not a fan of the title, they did an amazing job with this.
So it's 7 o'clock, so I'm gonna play it. If you guys want to watch, please feel free. But otherwise, let's give Mike a round of applause. This is the end, right? Is this kind of the end of the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to do questions and then I can play and?
Yes.
I was just wondering what education you had to get to where you are now. Did you study this in college? Did you study biology?
Yeah, so I got my degree in biology, my minor in ecosystem science and policy, but I always tell people that has nothing to do with what I'm doing. Zero. There's nothing I learned in college that I applied in my professional life. What I just had was passion. I tried to volunteer in every place that I could. It's difficult, unfortunately, to make a living in South Florida with environmental jobs, right? So you got to be really motivated. You got to know people. You got to be, put yourself out there. And I was the classic kid with the lizard on his ears, running around and climbing trees and stuff, and I just stuck with it.
You go to UF?
I was UM.
UF.
But I deal with a lot of those gators. Yes.
I imagine you must monitor your own radiation exposure. Do you have to do it in the critters too, or?
No, I don't monitor my radiation exposure. There's nothing dangerous about working in the cooling canals. If I were to go into the protected area, which I am trained to do, then yes, I have to frisk or be frisked before I get out to monitor. So sometimes, say a rattlesnake gets into the protected area, I'll have to dress down, go in there, remove the snake, frisk myself, frisk the snake, and then go out.
You're talking about the cooling canals or?
I'm talking about the actual power plant, not the cooling canals. There's no radioactivity to the cooling canals other than tritium. and it's lower than the acceptable rate of tritium allowed in drinking water for humans.
Mm.
So
What's tritium?
tritium is radioactive residue.
Ah.
I'm not an expert, so don't ask me.
How actually big are the canals?
168 linear miles.
And if we wanted to watch, I'm sorry, if we wanted to watch this, if we have to go, can we watch this? Are you gonna put this up?
Yeah, I'll send it in a follow-up email also.
Yes, sir.
Is there any like forms? I know you said like with the publication, but like, is there any like forms that like relate back to FPL that you could read on for like the database that which are collecting on the eggs and stuff?
There's
On the
nothing.
animal side?
Okay, so there's no public database. That's private information, but FPL does an annual report for crocodiles that is public knowledge.
Okay.
So there's a way to get it. I couldn't tell you how,
Got you.
but there is a way to get it.
Sounds good.
So,
Are you good?
yes.
So this provides awesome habitat for several federal and state listed species.
Yes.
So I don't, no offense, I don't normally think of FPNL as being like, you know, our wonderful conservation. You probably work with Ricardo Zambrano.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I work with him too, with the birds. And
He's the Birdman.
so what's the deal? Are they doing this because they're listed species there? Or are they stewards? Or they're required to federally, state?
It's a combination of everything, but we take it to the next level. You employ passionate people and you allow them to run with it, then you're gonna get a quality product.
So when you want to do something in there, who do you ask permission from?
Well, I have a boss, but they trust me based off of what I've done to operate. If I need permission for something, I'll have to go down those avenues to do it. But as far as creating habitat and all that, as long as I'm not in the way of anybody else, I don't need anybody's permission.
But your position is a federally mandated position, but FPL pays you.
No,
So you're paid by the federal government.
no, I'm paid by, I work for FPL, I'm paid by FPL. There are some things that are federally mandated that I'm responsible for. Like we meet with the federal, the crocodile folks, with the federal government every other year. I'm in constant contact with them. Anytime we have a dead crocodile pop up on site, I have to do all the biometric reporting and I report that to them. So everything is tracked, everything is traceable. We're able to get so much more information from crocs than in other areas because we have all these people on site, right? Imagine if I'm briefing every person and I tell them, hey, look for this. And if you see this, tell your supervisor, let them call me. I have hundreds of eyes throughout the whole system, right? In the middle of the Everglades, when a croc dies, nobody finds out about it unless a boater reports it or somebody comes into contact. We come into contact with that stuff whenever it happens. It can't hide from us, right? Because we have people out there. So, yes.
Do you do autopsies on any of the?
No necropsies for the crocs.
I should know that. Necropsy, not autopsy, necropsy.
Yeah, not on the crocs. We don't have the authority to do that. But on all the tegus, like we're currently in the middle of a tegu stomach study, diet study.
Interesting.
So finding all sorts of crazy stuff.
Is that also funded by FPL or
It's just, they don't make me do this.
passion project?
I want to do it.
Got it.
So they don't tell me, hey, you have to cut open all the tegus.
Yeah.
We're doing this because we want to publish work, but it's not part of what I have to do.
Got it. That's awesome.
Where do you send the dead crocs?
You don't send them anywhere.
Just bury them in a ditch?
If they're in an area that they're gonna be reported a million times, right, then I'll probably move them. If I can leave them to just be eaten by the other crocs, I'll leave them. Because that's what typically happens. They'll over time break it apart. Yes.
Going back to that slide where you showed the croc populations, what was the cause of that crash? I think it was in 2015.
Yeah, so that was a drought. So during that time, we were completely dependent on rain. Completely zero. Right now we have wells that pump water on that we control. We control the water level now. Historically speaking, it was rain-based. We were at the mercy of nature, right? So what happened was, with no fresh water, you're talking about shallow water, shallow hot water. There's a statistic to it that I don't know, but The evaporation rate is outrageous, right? What happens in a saltwater system when the water evaporates, the salt stays behind. Excuse me. The salt stays behind, right? So at its worst, it was at 90 parts per thousand. The bay is 35, right? So we are now fresher than the bay, and we have been for over a year. So there's a lot of people that have worked really hard to get to this point. It all stemmed from that. So it used to be a seagrass system, base system. With that spike in salinity, all the seagrass died. Fun fact, survivor seagrass we found in our croc ponds. I don't know if I did a good job explaining the croc ponds, but I'm really proud of this. When we were starting to figure out what we want to do to the system, how are we going to restore it, how are we going to bring it back, a lot of everything came back to seagrass, right? So we said, okay, well, what kind of seagrass do we have? You know, how salt resistant is it? If we are going to replant it, where are we going to get it from? How are we going to propagate it? All these questions, right? So we ended up actually, you know, in these meetings, I was like, wait a second, there's seagrass in some of the croc ponds because the croc ponds stay fresher. They're not connected to the cooling canal. They're also rain based, but they're their own system, right? Those ponds that we dig out. So they, in general,